Excellent, sir.
Okay, we're recording.
Wonderful. Hans, what a privilege it is to have time with you tonight. I think all of us would be helped. We obviously are familiar, having been working through your book, The Top 10 Mistakes That Leaders Make. I read that years and years and years ago, and it's always been on my top 50 leadership book list, and was personally benefited. And so when I saw the republished version, I thought we didn't actually choose to work through the workbook, although I'd love to look at that sometime. But we've just been working through the book itself, and I think we're familiar with your background, but I might be helpful just to bring us up to speed with what God has you doing right now. What's your current assignment and ministry focus today?
Sure. Can I'm writing down all your names. So.
Oh, wonderful. My name is Bobby Hill.
And Bobby, and then the other three gentlemen.
All right. You identify yourselves, guys.
I'm Brian.
All right. And then the other two.
I'm Josh.
Josh. Hi, Josh.
I'm Leron.
Leron?
Yeah, Leron.
And where are you guys located, just geographically curious?
We're sitting in the Norfolk, Virginia Beach metro area.
Okay, Virginia.
And the latecomer sitting to my right is named Steve. Put him down as Tardy, please.
Tardy. Right here.
All right. And then we have Randy over in Chiang Mai.
And Randy in Chiang Mai, that's correct.
And I'm in Denver, Colorado. Actually, Highlands Ranch, Colorado, but it's a suburb of Denver.
Right.
Okay, great. Well, yeah, I first wrote this book like 25 years ago. This is the new version that I noticed on your desk there. So about 10 years ago, I freshened it up because the illustrations were so old, and my kids were just tiny when I first wrote the book. And now they're all grown and married and having their own kids. So, yeah, but I've written 11 books, but, this is the book that just it's the little engine that could, It's still my most popular book and the one I get asked to speak on all the time. And actually, the little workbook you were referring to, I developed a couple of years ago. I mostly use that when I'm speaking to groups on the book. It's sort of a listening guide, and it's got a lot of my PowerPoint slides so people can fill in the blanks as they're listening to. Last week, I was up in Asheville, North Carolina at Ridgecrest.
Sure.
You're probably familiar with Ridgecrest?
Yes, we are. Yeah. Great Southern Baptist.
Yeah. I was speaking to the national leadership of Child Evangelism Fellowship for the week, and we used that workbook. So anywho, great to meet you guys. And when Todd reached out to me with just a question about how to find the notes, I'm glad you did, because I launched a new website and the links didn't carry over, so I was glad to put that on there. And I said, hey, I'd be glad to meet with you guys. There's nothing I enjoy more than pouring myself into leaders. So that's awesome. I'm glad we can be together tonight. So just a real quick summary of me. I've been married 44 years. My wife and I have 4 kids. And my greatest joy is to be a follower of Christ and a husband to Donna and father to my 4 wonderful children and their 3 spouses and my 10 grandchildren. The second question guys ask other guys. The first question is, what's your name? What's the second question?
What do you do?
What do you
do? Yeah. And I've done a lot through my life, but the thing I enjoy the most, that I'm most proud of, is my marriage, my family, my children, my grandchildren. Early in my career, I just had a crushing disappointment in leadership, which is how this book was born. In the introduction, I talk about the fact that I worked for a terrible boss. And when I speak, I tell you, I always ask this terrible boss question. How many of you have ever worked for a terrible boss? And 90% of the people raise their hands. And this is true in secular audiences, and it's true in the church and in ministries across the board. So there seem to be more bad leaders than good leaders. And so my career of 32 years was in the field of missions, international missions. And I led a ministry for 20 years called World Venture, which is based here in Littleton, Colorado. So I've been to over 100 countries of the world, but I've seen a lot of bad leadership. And I just started getting a passion as the years went on, not only to write about leadership, but to help Christian leaders and ministry leaders. 6 years ago, I left World Venture, kind of finished up that assignment, and now I do full-time leadership coaching, leadership mentoring, writing, speaking on leadership. But here's why. I really believe we don't pour enough resources into leaders, and I'm glad you guys are meeting. And what you're doing, Bobby, this is just awesome, because we seem to pour so much money in the church into every heartache and every need that comes up and every ministry that needs money, but we don't focus enough on building up our leadership. I think that the church and ministries are only as effective as their leadership team.
Absolutely.
And I see so many ministries that have these grand plans and grand visions and objectives and strategies and goals, and they don't accomplish them. And why is that? Often because it's a very unhealthy leadership team. So that's the space that God has just called me at this season of my life to go into and to coach and to mentor and to do whatever I can to help Christian leaders do a better job and learn more. And let me just say, one of my foundational philosophies, one of my presuppositions is being spiritual is not enough to be a great Christian leader.
That's right.
Randy, you're over there in Thailand, and this problem is, you're getting ready to go to India. This problem is so prevalent in China, all over Asia, Africa, among the church, the nationals thinking if I know my Bible, if I'm a spiritual man, I don't have sin in my life, and I'm all prayed up, then I'm a great Christian leader. And so I say that's the foundation of great leadership, but it's not enough. Don't you know, you've probably seen, and that's how this book was born. This guy that I worked with was so godly and spiritual and visionary and had his doctorate in theology. There was nothing wrong with him personally, a tremendous visionary, but he fell into what I call the founder's trap. People that start churches, start ministries, start businesses. As they become successful, they can't let go and share the load with other leaders, and they become control freaks. And that's why he stood in the way of my dreams and my vision. And I had moved across the world to work for this guy. And finally I quit. I just couldn't take it. And he just dashed my heart and crushed me. And I just said, Lord, I'm not bitter against the person. My prayer was, Lord, if I ever get into leadership, help me to be the kind of leader that inspires people, motivates people, lifts them up, helps them be successful, and not frustrate them. So that's how that book was born, and I've written a number of other books as well. But that's kind of the background of who I am and what I do.
Hans, speaking into that, I'm curious that when you were writing this book initially, who did you envision as your target audience? It appears that you wrote it with some intentionality towards applying. Obviously, there's a strong Christian and biblical emphasis in the book, but there's also certain chapters that are feel as though they could easily be picked up and adopted and used by someone simply as a marketplace leader. Was that your intention, or is that just accidental?
That was my intention, to be a crossover book. I'll tell you a story. I was in Asheville the other night at a Starbucks, after I spoke, and I struck up a conversation with a 70-year-old man who owns a business in Asheville, a very successful medical supply business. He's actually an immigrant from Venezuela. And through a series of conversation, he figured out I'm the author of this book. And he loves this book. Now, this guy is not a brother in Christ. He is he's just a very successful businessman. But he said, "Oh my God, this is like my favorite book on leadership. I can't believe you're the guy who wrote the book." And now he's having me come back to Asheville and speak to his whole company early next year. And so, yeah, I wrote it as a crossover book because I felt like my message applied to the church, but it also applies to everybody in leadership. And also I get a chance to share spiritual principles and verses and scriptures. You know, I don't beat people over the head with
Right.
in the book, but I do share clearly that I think Christ was the greatest model of servant leadership there ever was. And so it's been interesting to see how many non-Christians love the book.
That is interesting. That's interesting. All right, guys, I kicked it off. Y'all jump in with some questions.
I have a question, if you don't mind me jumping in real quick, Hans. It's kind of a two-part question, and I think it's fresh in my mind just because I was reading chapter 9, preparing for this week, and I'm really enjoying the additional little audiobook things you throw in there, adjusting your age to the age that you are now and the different things that you're throwing in the audiobook. But you also mentioned, referring to page 178, about the ongoing successor search and how you mentioned that Jeff took over for you.
Yes.
And then you went into talking about the 4 phases of succession. And I wonder if you just speak into that a little bit more and address when you were looking at Jeff, did you see the next 3 phases? Did you know that he was going to carry on that, thinking that way, that the successor leading into the successor, the trickle-down Timothy 2:2 principle? Can you just speak into that a little bit? Because it really intrigued me this week reading about that, how you watched Jeff kind of take over for you, but then you knew that you had put in place the next 4 successors. We just had someone last year come and speak. Pastor Bobby had them come in, and he spoke that he has a 7-tier layer of succession, emerging succession all the way down to what it would look like 7 successions down. It's really extreme, but I really liked your 4 layers. I want to do that a little bit.
What page are the 4 layers on?
They are on
People have this misconception that an author has their books memorized.
Of course, yeah.
You don't?
No, I don't.
No, I'm just
We won't.
yeah.
Give me 1 second. It's right around the 178.
Is it 184?
Is it 184?
Maybe that's not it.
I don't recall a 4-phase succession thing.
Sounds good, though, Hans.
It does sound good. I'll put it in my next book.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
But I can talk a lot about succession because, oh my gosh, I see it as a disaster so often that really hurts churches and ministries because they don't have a good succession. And I'm just working with a ministry right now that has a 30-year CEO who won't let go. You know, Lyle Schaller, the great church researcher, always said, leaders do more damage by staying too long than by leaving too soon.
Yeah.
Hans, it's on 191 if you want it for reference.
191, okay.
Towards the bottom there.
And so Paul and Timothy.
Yeah.
So it breaks my heart to see how many, and all the reasons why I mentioned in this chapter, why it's hard to let go. Just as an aside, I think boards, whether it's a deacon board, or elder board, or a ministry board, boards have they do really well at launching leaders, but they do a lousy job at helping them finish. I have seen so many boards turn against a faithful leader at the very end for various reasons. You know, have you all seen that?
Yes, absolutely.
And it's sad because it almost happened to me when I announced that I thought it was time for me to move on. The minute a person announces that, everything changes with the board. And we had a couple of board members on my board that wanted to throw me to the curb, like, all right, next. He doesn't have a heart for it anymore. Next. And I'm like, wait a minute, I just gave you 20 years of my life. And I would appreciate a soft landing, not thrown out the back. I can't tell you how many leaders I've seen that I call, they're thrown on the heap of cast out leaders. I see it, and I think it's a sin of a ministry. Thankfully, the majority of my board prevailed and said, no, wait a minute. He was 10 years as a missionary, 20 years as our leader. That's 30 years. Come on, let's let him, gracefully ease out of here while we have a healthy succession plan. And by the way, the number one reason to have a good succession plan is so you don't hurt the organization, right?
Right.
And that all I wanted was to leave in a way that would not hurt our ministry. And that's what the board decided. And so then we had a very healthy transition, and the ministry never skipped the beat. So let me see now the 4 phases. Let's see if I can refresh my memory here. You said
I hope I didn't name it something that you didn't name it. 4 generations.
4
4 generations. Okay.
Click.
Well, I'm not sure what's behind your question about the 4 generations.
Sure. I really.
Paul, in his discipleship, Paul and Timothy, and teach others who will teach others also. I know that's the 4 generations of discipleship.
Yeah, I think I was tying it together with Jeff, who took over after you.
Yeah.
When you saw Jeff, were you thinking of the other generations below Jeff,
No.
or were you thinking
Yes.
were you raising Jeff up to think that way so he could continue it? What was in your mindset taken into that 4 generation? How did you tie the 2 together? And if there's no thread, you can just tell me there's no thread.
The 4 generation. I just happened to mention in the Paul had that in mind in his discipleship.
Okay.
Not apply that to succession.
Okay.
So I don't think a leader has any authority to go beyond 1 generation in succession planning. And I'm working with a ministry right now where the leader's trying to micromanage the succession too much. And I think it's the board's business, the succession plan, not the leader's business. So here's what I required of all my direct reports. I call it the bus list. If you got run over by a bus today, who are 3 people that could replace you? And I want their names. And every year when we had our annual review, we review those names. Now, that's not only if you get run over a bus, but it's also communicating that it's important that you're developing your replacements, right?
Yeah.
One of the final jobs of a leader is to work yourself out of a job. Many leaders are threatened by that, but you need to get over it and get over yourself and realize you're not indispensable, and develop the leaders around you. John Maxwell wrote a great book about that. Develop the leader within you, develop the leaders around you. And I required each of my direct reports to keep that list going, and I had the list. So if he went down in an airplane in Chiang Mai, Thailand, I would know who the next Asia director could be. And then the board, I had the list for the board. Now, this was a confidential list, by the way. We didn't let these people know they were on these lists, because that can be, that can create some unrealistic expectations. So, but Jeff was one of the 3 people on my list, and I developed him so that when it was time for me to go, the board had actually about 3 or 4 people that they could look to replace me. That's kind of a long answer, but I think that's as far as succession planning can go, is that the board have a good plan and that the leader is developing some good people for them to choose. Now, some ministries and churches insist on going outside for the replacement. And if that's the case, well, then that's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah. Hans, I know we've all seen lots and lots of toxic leaders. Would you agree that one of the biggest problems in leaders who are unhealthy, dysfunctional, or even toxic would be insecurity?
Yes.
In other words, a leader who is insecure.
Yes, I do. I think a lot of leaders are very insecure, and so they control, control freaks. The bottom line is they have a fear of losing control. And why do they have a fear of losing control? And I think it is insecurity. The kind of leader that says, I can never go on vacation because the place falls apart without me. Well, that's a very insecure leader. And, oh wow, I just saw I've got a 10 more minute. I should have logged in with my wife's paid account, so we may have to log out and log back in.
That's okay.
I forgot I have a free account, but my wife has a paid account, and the free
We'll send you an offering, Hans, if it would help out here.
Hey, so anyway, I do think I write in my new book, which I don't know if y'all have seen the sequel, Top 10 Ways to Be a Great Leader, but I thought I'd let y'all know about that. And this I just wrote recently, 25 years after I wrote the blue book. I wrote the red one and said, now 30 years later, what are the 10 essential skills every leader must master? The mistakes will sort of negative. This is sort of positive, and I use the acrostic leadership, LEADER. The word leadership has 10 letters, and I love lists of 10. So I use the acrostic for leadership, and the E in leadership stands for emotional intelligence, EQ. And you guys probably have discussed that. I'm really big on that, and I think, again, those leaders that don't delegate well, they want to control everything. They have a lot of insecurity, and they have some huge blind spots.
For sure. Someone else?
So Hans, in the role that I'm in, I've been going for about a year now in helping to transform 7 companies in all centric around real estate. And one of the things I found out you actually commented on at the end, and it was one statement, but I felt there was a lot of depth to it and wondered if you'd experienced it. But you made the statement that leaders have to lead into the future despite naysayers and opposition. And what I find is that is actually, I think, a whole book could be written on that statement from my experience, in the sense of how you navigate naysayers and opposition as a leader. First off, it happens a lot more than I have ever experienced. I used to be on the government side of things for 12 years running government contracts. So now being more in the civilian life, if you will, and in real estate specifically, there's a lot of that. And how have you found it? I guess the question being, how have you found navigating that? Do you rely, I guess, more in your experience on just close friends and peers? I mean, how do you continue to maintain health while walking through the naysayers and the opposition from your experience?
But particularly as a servant leader.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
That deepens the question.
It does.
Yeah, and I do a whole seminar on leading change. It's a big topic. Everybody resists change. I say there's 3 groups of people. There's 15% that are the innovators, that are they're eager to go. They're the entrepreneurs, and they're the mavericks. There's the 15% that are the naysayers that'll never go along no matter what, and the 70% in the middle who are what I call the fence sitters. And once they're convinced, they'll go along with you, and they'll watch. So the first thing I tell leaders is a lot of pastors make this mistake, and business people. Where do they put all their attention? In trying to turn around the negative 15%. It's the worst place to put your energy. Yeah, I think it was Tom Peters that wrote a book years ago. You should fire the bottom 10% every year. That's pretty brutal for a servant leader, but the point is, don't waste time with the naysayers. Where should you put most of your time? With the 15% that's the leading edge. And those are your friends. And Patrick Lencioni, I'm a huge fan of Patrick Lencioni. He calls that the
And I'm waiting.
That may be weird.
I'm
What?
just waiting.
You froze up right at his answer, right at his answer moment. Your picture froze.
Am I unfrozen now?
You are.
Yes, you're good.
Where did I freeze?
All right when you were giving him the answer.
Yeah. On where should I focus?
Where should the leader focus?
Okay, let's log out and let me give you a different number to call back in on different time.
Yep, I'm ready.
It's 303-888-3380.
Got it.
Did you get that, Randy?
303.
888-3380.
That's it. I'll see you in a minute.
All right.